Hello, professional property managers. Andrew Smallwood here with Peter Lohmann of RL Property Management. And excited to introduce many of you to Peter. I know there's a good number of you who are familiar with him because Peter has written some, I want to say like 3,000 plus word articles, if it can feel like 10,000 plus because they're so thorough and well done. Peter is a great follow on Twitter. We'll give some resources. I'm going to actually just give it right now, which is peterlohmann.com. If you're not sure on the spelling, just check your podcast player and you'll see it right in the title of the episode. peterlohmann.com. And whenever Peter comes out with one of these, kind of wave making articles in the industry that generally stirs up some good conversation, you'll get a notification about if you sign up for his email list there. He's a great follow on Twitter, and he's got a podcast himself. I think it's called Owner Occupied.
Yep.
Is that right, Peter?
Yep, that's right.
Cool. So some great resources, and we recommend Peter as a resource. And the way I'd like to get things kicked off, Peter, is actually, something I've noticed, following you on Twitter and just following, kind of public conversation and digital conversation with you. We've had, I guess this is our second conversation now. Is that I think you've got this engineering background that really informs the way you do things. Like you don't carry yourself as the arrogant guy who's got everything figured it out as the know-it-all. But you are the kind of guy who is constantly figuring things out and coming up with good and impressive answers to problems that a lot of people are facing. And I think you've got a level of attention to detail and diligence and everything. I'd just love to know kind of where that comes from, and if you could share a little bit of what it's like to think like an engineer in the property management business.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me, Andrew. Really excited to be here and kind of dive into some of these meaty topics. So, yeah, you're right. My background is engineering. My degree is in electrical engineering, and I worked as a control systems engineer right out of school for about 5 years. And this was from about 2007 to 2012-ish. During that time, my business partner and I were buying up single-family rentals and renting them out. And so that's kind of how I got familiar with managing property and the world of real estate. But I think to speak more to your question, I definitely do approach things with that engineering mindset. It's hard for me to know now how much of that was like just a natural way of how I move about the world and how much of it came from my background in engineering. But I definitely always approach things from a systems perspective. Something I like to remind my staff is when we encounter a problem, let's say a client is unhappy because we didn't cut their grass when we were supposed to. Like they mentioned during the sign-up process, they wanted our team to handle cutting the grass, and we dropped that ball. When I encounter something like that, of course I want to make things right by the client, make sure we get that taken care of right away, refund them if it's appropriate. But my mind immediately is going to, okay, now how did that happen, right? Where in the systems and processes for onboarding a new client did we drop that ball? I am so much more interested in that than I am the specifics of, this individual client and that one mess up. I'm much more like, okay, is this a systemic problem or is this just a one-off thing that we need to solve and move on? So I think I often think about engineering and the way that what it really teaches you. Of course, you learn, as an electrical engineer, I learned about circuits and current and voltage and Ohm's law and all those great things. But I think even more important than that was you learn how to think. You learn how to problem solve. You learn how to break things down and think about a whole system from a problem solving perspective. And that was extremely valuable. And in some ways, I compare that to the education you get as a lawyer. I think law school teaches you similar how to really think from just like almost like an outside perspective looking in and trying to think about problems in a very holistic way rather than just kind of blindly patching things and moving on. You're taking more of like an 30,000 foot view of things. So I've found it really useful in property management. I did come out of engineering school with a little bit of that. If you've ever heard engineer's disease, which is, when because you're good at engineering, you think you're good at everything. I definitely suffered from that disease, especially when I was younger. And it made me kind of reinvent the wheel a lot in property management. And I kind of stumbled along for years before I found NARPM and get started really connecting with other professionals in the space. I was like, oh yeah, I really shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of great solutions that have already been figured out. Let me take what makes sense from those and then kind of put my own spin on it as well.
Yeah, that's a really helpful way of starting. And I think you've got this nice blend of, thinking like an engineer, but it seems like you've also got kind of an entrepreneurial spirit about you. That you love building a business, that you love thinking about not just the technical systems, but also the human systems that exist, in property management and solving those problems, in different ways.
Yeah.
So, maybe where we can go next here, Peter, is what's on a lot of people's mind right now is staffing challenges. And there's always been difficulty in the industry. And a lot of people, what they experience is, hey, I'm in a lower margin, kind of service business category. And, it's hard to make the investment to make that first hire and then the second hire. And then going from there, a lot of people kind of get stuck in the, 300 to 800 door gap, et cetera, figuring out how to get to a point of scale. So like there's been persistent problems for a long time, but there's also some like very timely problems happening right now. And I know you've experienced this and you guys are working through it. Tell us a little bit about what you're experiencing there and how you guys are approaching it.
Yeah, so we're definitely experiencing some pain. We, just for some context, we manage about 520 units. We're here in Central Ohio. And we've had just recently here in the last few weeks, we had 2 different team members give their 2 weeks notice. And we've got about 15 people at the company, just for a sense of scale. And prior to that, we had quite a lot of discussion with some of our office team members here about just quite frankly, pay rates. We had some folks that were upset that they weren't making more. And so we went through a lot of introspection. My business partner and I did a lot of thinking, and we ran some numbers, and we talked quite a bit to the manager of those office employees about what they were experiencing. And we did some research into the marketplace in terms of what other positions were available and what they would pay. And yeah, it's a hard time to be an employer right now. I think there's no doubt that the balance of power has shifted more toward labor, quote unquote, or toward the employee, which is fine. There's no problem with that. But it does present challenges for employers. You're competing with other employers for talent. You've got inflation. You're dealing with COVID, of course, and the stimulus. So yeah, it's been a time of soul searching and really thinking about what kind of employer do we want to be? What kind of jobs can we offer? What kind of careers can we provide for the people that work here? And is it really feasible to expect that we're going to be able to provide a salary to an office employee, say a property manager? Is it realistic to think we could provide them a salary on which they could raise a family, for example? And I struggle with that because we are in a relatively low margin business, although I think that's getting better thanks to a lot of hard work by a lot of people in and out of the industry. But nevertheless, the revenue from our businesses, first and foremost, comes from rent that's paid by tenants, sort of on its way to the owners, right? It's sort of like the rent gets paid in, we kind of grab a handful and the rest of it goes to the owner. And that's necessarily going to be there's always going to be a limit to how far you can push that number up. and you can make it up through ancillary revenue and maintenance and brokerage and some other things. But there's just never going to be a time when you're making, 50% margins or 80% margins like you see in some software type businesses. It's just not going to happen. So we need to be realistic about that. And the folks that you're employing, you really need to keep a close eye on the labor efficiency ratio, which is just, if you just take the total number of dollars of revenue that you're earning and you divide that by the raw dollars that you're paying out in wages. Greg Crabtree, who's written a couple excellent books, which are highly relevant for property managers about accounting and profit. He says you want to keep that labor efficiency ratio over 2.0, meaning for every dollar in wages you pay out, you should be generating $2 in revenue. So you got to look at that, and how do you square that with employees who are demanding raises and clients who don't want to pay anything more. So yeah, definitely been on the kind of the forefront of my mind here.
Yeah. And so, as you're encountering this situation, going back to what you talked about earlier, I'm sure you and your partner are thinking about not just the moment of, hey, somebody put in their 2 weeks notice and how do we specifically refill this seat, et cetera. It sounds like you're asking these kind of questions of what's really the root cause of what's going on here? What are the factors kind of at play? What's the game board that we're playing on now, and how has that shifted? And, you may still be in the middle of this, but what are some of these solutions, you could say, at that layer deeper or upstream, that you guys are talking about and thinking about as you talk about resolving it, while it sounds like holding a standard of a direct labor efficiency ratio of 2.0 or higher? Like, there's some standards you want to keep in place and still solve for the challenge of not having to have a high rate of turnover.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I have a tendency when we've got two employees who give notice within a 3-week period, I have a tendency to maybe overthink, and maybe I'm overanalyzing the situation. It could just be a coincidence, but immediately my first thought is to think about, hey, are we doing something wrong here, right? And I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, and maybe even myself when I was a little younger, your instinct is to be like angry or resentful. I invested all this money, I trained this person, I've bent over backwards, I've given raises, I've added PTO, and then they go ahead and give their notice anyway. You get all mad. And I think that's human, right? We all feel that, but you really have I think I'm going to butcher this, but there's an approach to life which is like, everything is your fault. You just take responsibility for everything, and you move about the world that way, rather than constantly, and not to walk around like a victim, but just to take responsibility for everything. And I think that's powerful. So in this situation, I'm immediately wondering, like, okay, are we as employers messing up? In other words, are we not providing a good work environment? Are we not showing appreciation? Are we not providing support and training and career advancement? So my mind is kind of dealing with all these thoughts of like, okay, do we need to course correct here? But at the same time, we have an immediate pressing problem of we need to backfill these roles, and really quickly, because we were already kind of understaffed going into this. So it's kind of like almost like an emergency that we get these positions filled so that we can service our clients, right? So, all right, so solutions, right? What do we do? Well, my mind is going a few different directions. One is, and it's going to be no surprise, but remote team members, right? And we worked with Home Vault here recently to place our very first remote team member, an occupied maintenance coordinator. His name is Yomar. He's from the Philippines. He started a week ago, and it's gone really well so far. It's early days, but the cost of living in the Philippines is just drastically different than what it is in the United States. And so you can pay a living wage, and it's a lot less, and it's a contractor instead of W-2. So there's some real advantages there from keeping your labor efficiency ratio down, right? Because these folks are able to work hard and just crank out work for a much lower hourly rate, quite frankly. So I think that's going to be a part of it. I'm also looking at. I'm just sort of. I'm starting to wonder if I was thinking about the jobs that we offer here a little bit incorrectly. I always had in my mind that the folks who came to work here would kind of be here forever, and that we would have plenty of opportunities for them to advance and move up, and that they would want to do so, and that they would also be willing to invest in their own personal growth and leadership growth at a rate that was sort of congruent with the company growth, and that everything was just going to be roses and rainbows, right? Well, no surprise. I think what I'm learning here is, especially for kind of the entry level office jobs here, I just can't pay those roles $25 an hour, right? It just doesn't. The numbers don't pencil in. These are like 16, 18, $20 an hour jobs, and they're the type of jobs where I can bring someone in, and if my systems are set up right, I can onboard and train and have someone doing 90%, operating at 90% capacity within a few weeks, through Process Street and Loom videos and Buildium and all the other resources that we have. So I guess one of the conclusions that I'm kind of turning over in my mind here is, maybe I just need to be okay with a little bit of turnover. As long as we treat people well, we're honest and upfront about what the job is, what it pays, and what the opportunities are. Some people are going to move on and do great things elsewhere, and that's okay. We need to be happy for them, cheer them on, while kind of clearing the way for another, maybe entry-level person to come in, get experience with real estate, get experience with property management. For a lot of people, this is their first office job, right? These are people coming out of maybe a bartender job or a server job, and for them, they're really thankful to get that experience and really learn what it is to work in an office, and it could be a stepping stone for them. And again, I think what I'm talking myself into is, as long as we made best effort to provide opportunities for training, provide pay raises, and as much as possible opportunities to move up in a company that's growing. That's not always going to be possible. If they decide to move on, that's okay. So that's kind of, I'm sort of midstream with all this, so my thoughts are maybe a little a little jumbled here still. But
I think so many people are having this conversation, within their organizations, or in many cases just looking in the mirror, trying to figure out, ask these same questions. And, we're hearing from some other property managers saying, you know what, I am going to invest a little bit more into the manager level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we are going to expect this person to work with people, develop and train them quickly, run a system, right? But there's not going to be that advancement opportunity for that kind of position within the company. And we should expect people to learn and grow and eventually exit the company to whatever's next for them out of that role. So we need good managers in place to make sure that that's done well. And you also mentioned, certainly there's a ton of conversation and a lot of people looking at global talent and remote talent as a solution as well. So appreciate you sharing both of those.
Yeah, and I'll give some credit here to Matthew Whitaker at Evernest. He's got a couple great podcasts that I think your audience would really like. 300 to 3000 is one of them. And he's talked about this, and I've heard him say this. I heard him say this, probably many months ago, and maybe it's finally now real, which is like, people are going to come, they're going to be with your company for a while, and they're going to move on, and we need to almost like embrace that, because they're going to then go and be ambassadors about your company and your clients and your residents out into the community. And you need to treat those people well while they work for you, help them along in their career, and wish them well on their journey. So I think that I want to give some credit to him, to maybe helping plant the seeds there when I heard that for the first time.
Absolutely. And I think, Peter, something we talk a lot about at Second Nature and that we're focused on as a company, one of the conversations we're focused on is how do property managers create value today and also in the years ahead? And I want to tie this to what we're talking about, which is there's a big movement rightly into remote work and saying, hey, we can get these jobs done at a same, sometimes even a higher level than they're happening today at a lower cost. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's a more efficient way of doing things. So of course, like, why wouldn't you do that? Um, there's a lot of talk about, hey, let's bring in a lot of the technology, right, that can perform some of these functions, some of the automated workflow, right, optimization, et cetera, that makes us more efficient as an organization, more reliable, it's, and, Second Nature is standing up and applauding everything in this direction.
Mm-hmm.
We think it's important. However, if that's the only game that people are playing today, then the reality is that's a business that's becoming commoditized, right? When it's a cost-cutting game, kind of across the board. Of course, doing that faster than other people, there's going to be some advantage temporarily there. But over time, that's going to be, eventually you're going to be, in the pinching businesses, pinching penny business, and if it's only about cutting cost. And so one of the questions we like to ask property managers and people like yourself is about creating new value, and where's kind of the enduring value that isn't as susceptible to that commoditization, over time. And so would love to get your thoughts on that, of like kind of what you're seeing happening today. And as you look forward to the future, where are you guys trying to innovate? Where are you guys trying to create new value? Where's really the enduring value of RL property management position?
Yeah, great thought there. Great topic. Wow, it's broad. Let me pull together some of my thinking on this. So, yeah, I think in terms of cost cutting, right? And wages, of course, are by far the dominant expense item for a property manager, consuming anywhere from a third to two-thirds of their overall expenses. So looking to save money on wages, as we are and everyone is no harm there, like you said. I think there's certainly an attitude in property management. I would say it's fair to say the majority of property managers, their perspective is very much toward the side of fee maxing. How do we pump up our numbers? How do we grow our revenue in terms of the fees we charge to tenants, clients? How do we generate more dollars for every hour of labor? And there's definitely a limit to that. I'm not the first person to point this out, even among the industry. Jordan Moyler likes to remind everybody that Jeff Bezos says, your margin is my opportunity. There's definitely some truth to that. I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that I think especially now with how many other revenue opportunities there are in property management, we need to be thinking about our clients and their bottom line, right? And every dollar that you charge your client in additional fees, whether that's the monthly management fee, the leasing fee, or other fees, that's a dollar less that is available to earn as a return on their investment, right? So I do think we need to maybe start looking at keeping our fees flat as a competitive strategy, or as a way to help our owners be successful with their businesses, because their real estate really is their business, just like our property management company is our business. Not necessarily saying we run out there and cut to the bone, just because I think there's an old way of thinking, which is like, I'm going to bend over backwards and do anything for my client just because, with no, there's no strategy, there's no anything. It's just kind of like, that's because that's the way dad did it or whatever. And that's not what I'm suggesting at all. You see that attitude with realtors a lot, where they're used to doing anything to help their client sell their home. Then they come in and they bring that attitude to property management where it might not be appropriate. I'm talking more about very deliberately saying, you know what, Mr. Owner, you're an investor. We like where you're headed. You're growing your business. We want to grow with you and we want to help you be successful. What if we cut you a little bit of a deal, on volume? So anyway, I think there's some opportunities there. I think that needs to start to be more of the conversation. In terms of what is the value that a property manager provides, I definitely think we need to start looking more toward boots on the ground, sweaty startup, blue collar, hard work type value. Because I think the value that we provide in terms of moving money around and accounting and some of these other higher level, especially financial type functions, these are going to become centralized, automated, and therefore competed away in terms of the ability to provide value there. It's just going to be taken for granted that any property manager I work with, or if I decide to work with Zillow and manage myself, all of those options are going to provide a base level of accounting and rent collection and some of these other compliance, things like that. So where I really think there's going to be value, though, in the future is no matter what, you're going to need people to go over to that house or apartment and do stuff, okay? And whether that's posting a notice or fixing a leak or showing a unit or doing a move-out inspection, some human being is going to need to get in a car and go to that property. So if you can control that labor force and that organizational structure and logistical challenge, there's real value there, right? And I think about this in terms of our clients where a tenant calls in about a leak and we can have someone there that afternoon. That is not something that even a homeowner could really organize or accomplish. And here we are providing it for residents.
You believe, hey, the kinds of things that involve people solving problems, directly, the boots on the ground, right, being the term that you used, that's going to be the hardest stuff for technology to replace, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody looking at something, smelling something, and knowing something's wrong, and having the expertise to get that problem solved quickly, that's going to be some of the most enduring value in the property management business. I would bet, if that's your perspective, that either you have in-house maintenance or you've in-housed at least important parts of the maintenance process. Is that true?
Yep, we do have an in-house maintenance team here. We take it quite seriously. We've got 6 W-2 employees who work for the company that are running around, doing turnovers and things like that. Yep. And look no further than, if you've tried to get a handyman come out to your house anytime in the last year or two, just to do something really basic, like maybe fix a gutter or replace a doorknob or something, that's darn near impossible. And if you can get anyone to call you back, they're scheduled way out and the prices are high. And those people and those activities, the market is showing you that that's valuable, and that's, I think, the direction that I'm thinking about as the future of the business. Because the reality is the Zillows and the Airbnbs and even some of our vendors like Buildium and Appfolio, they've got their eye on these, the financial side of things. And that's eventually, like I said, it's going to be competed away, that there's not going to be any meaningful differentiation you're going to be able to make. Oh, well, if you have your property professionally managed, we can collect your rent, ACH. No, that's all going to be available to everyone, right? So.
Yep. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Before we get into Zillow and Airbnb, because I would love to take a couple minutes there. I know you've got some ideas of what could happen that I think would be interesting for people to hear. There was something else you said, which I think is important, which was about this paradigm of fee maxing. And, my view, I'll just speak for myself, not second nature or anybody else, but To me, the idea of fee maxing, it's got a PR problem. And the PR problem is it's saying it really gives this impression, which is what you described of how do we maximize transaction value? How do we extract as much as possible from what's going on in the business, as opposed to a value creation
Yeah.
paradigm? And to your point, I thought you made a really salient point, which was that I think you said it was realtors that come from this, just do anything to invest in the relationship. Well, we're believers at Second Nature of being generous, investing in the relationship, creating great experiences for people, and also making sure those experiences are relevant enough where people are saying they're experiences I'm willing to pay for, right? Because otherwise you will over rotate on doing a
Hmm.
bunch of generous things and you cannot build a business, right? So it's looking for how do we create new valuable experiences that people are willing to pay for as a qualifier, and saying, how do we get on the value creation? How do we get into the value maxing game, right?
Mm.
And you talked about, and listen, it's perfectly okay to monetize your services. Some people are afraid to monetize the services, and we see that hesitancy out there. There is kind of this both and perspective, as opposed to saying an either or, kind of perspective that we would advocate for. And I feel like that's what you're calling for, and recognizing, hey, investing a ton of your time into something, that's financial, transactional, et cetera here, that may be okay in the short term, but that may be a difficult investment of your time long term, because you're going to see that kind of stuff get commoditized and more available for people to do it
Yeah.
on their own. It's not going to differentiate you long term as a professional manager.
Yeah. And I
But
also,
oh,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I also think it's just, you can't build a business around how do we get the most money out of our client. I mean, how do you energize your staff around that? You're putting that as a mission statement banner on your wall. I mean, it's just not. You gotta, obviously you need to make sure you're making your margins, and you work with groups like Profit Coach and others to make sure you're hitting your numbers, but that shouldn't be the be all end all. You really, and I'm speaking as much to myself as anyone else here, you need something bigger that you're working toward, or that you're a way in which you're serving people or adding value. And I actually think this is extremely challenging in property management. It's very difficult because the base level services that we provide are extremely taken for granted by both tenants and clients. And it's a grind every day. Um, so it's so hard to just make it through the day-to-day struggle, let alone make a decent margin, let alone now we're supposed to be serving some greater philosophical idea. It's like, get the hell out of here. I mean, it's hard, but, and I think too about, there's a lot of talk in the industry around, you're not in the property management business, you're in the wealth creation through real estate business, as a messaging point, or a talking point with clients. And at a certain point I get that, but at a certain point I also push back against it, because I really feel like, our title or our role is not asset manager. And I think an asset manager position, which would be more like someone who's overseeing a few different apartment communities and thinking about how to how to how to position those properties, how to market them and brand them, how to price them, how to arrange the financing, debt and equity to maximize rates of return and things like that. That's generating wealth through real estate. That's a very high level, value add, extremely, some would say difficult type of activity that commands an appropriate compensation for an asset manager type role. And we just aren't compensated that way as property managers. We are dealing in the tactical. We are dealing with, there's a leaky hose at the property. The property's not renting. The tenant's moving out. Okay, this is tactics. Okay, if we want to sell strategy, first, I think we should be paid appropriately for that. And second, I just don't know that we're in a position to actually be able to dictate strategy from a position of authority into the marketplace, because we are viewed by our clients as tacticians, as executors, as assistants. And I'd love to change that, and maybe it will change in my lifetime. And I know it's different in some other countries, even like Australia. I've heard property managers are very much viewed as professionals, but that's just not the reality here. And so, would I love it if all my clients called me when they were formulating their retirement plans and how are we going to get to 10 million in assets? Do you recommend buying a single family or multifamily? That would be fantastic. And we might have one or two clients out of 200 who are open to having that conversation with their property management company. So what does that leave, right? If we can't be their asset manager and it's a scrap and a struggle just to collect the rent, how do we then, commit ourselves to some higher calling? How can we create, more value for our clients? It's a hard thing. It's really difficult. And I wish I was, had some answers there. It's something that we think a lot about, and it's challenging.
Well, certainly, if it was just that easy as us getting on a call and talking about it, we'd probably have a lot
we'd be
more
billing for
professionally
it.
managed homes out there. That's right. Well, Peter, here's where I'd like to go as we bring this to a close here, which is, you mentioned Zillow and Airbnb in particular, which is, I think a lot of people are thinking about Zillow and talking about Zillow. I think fewer people are thinking about Airbnb or talking about Airbnb. How do you really see the strengths of those companies? And I will reserve my opinion until after you share yours, but would love to start with why should people be paying attention to that, and what role do they play in the years ahead, do you think?
Yeah, so I'll stick to Airbnb just for the sake of time, and I think it's really interesting. So Airbnb has done something really important, which is they have aggregated demand. In other words, they have commanded the eyeballs, or they command the eyeballs and the hearts and minds of consumers. So if you are going to travel to another city and you don't want to stay in a brand name hotel, where do you go? You go to Airbnb. Of course you do, right? You're going to go on Craigslist and look for some short-term rental? No, you're not going to do that, okay? And are you going to Google like Baltimore small apartment short-term rental and you're going to look through what's coming through Google? No, you're not going to do that either. You're going to go on Airbnb. And so that, I think you almost cannot overstate how valuable capturing the whole side of one marketplace is in that way. Because what that means really is Airbnb now controls where those eyeballs get directed. So if you have, and I do have, a short-term property available for rent, you have to list it on Airbnb, realistically speaking, for most people, if you want to fill that unit with good short-term guests. So how does that affect us as property managers? Well, I think, if you think about how Airbnb deals with the short-term rental stay, okay, think about what they're controlling. They control the quote application process. They control the security deposit, if there even is one. They control the quote rent payment. They control the quote lease agreement by and large. They really, there's a validated review component where you can't leave a review for a landlord unless you've stayed at the property, and vice versa. So their platform is just ironclad. And I think it would be so simple for them to turn a switch, and now guess what? You can rent an Airbnb for your next apartment, right? And so it'd be as simple as, oh, I already have an Airbnb account. Let me just go on Airbnb and see what's for rent, because I want to live in an apartment downtown for the next couple of years. And now I heard that Airbnb has unfurnished apartments for rent on year-long leases. So now think about from a perspective of a tenant how great this experience would be. You're dealing with a trusted platform. You're dealing with verified reviews of the landlord and the property itself. You're dealing with a payment system that you already are hooked up to with your credit card and everything else, and you know it's not going to be goofing you around with, fraud or anything like that. You don't have to fill out a ridiculous 3-page application where you're giving away your mother's maiden name and your social security number and everything else. You don't have to deal with a shady landlord who's not going to be responsive because that landlord knows you're going to leave a review, and that review actually means something. So you know your landlord's going to be responsive. It's just as simple as could be. It's a beautiful, beautiful experience for a resident. So what does that mean for us as property owners and property managers? It means if we want access to great tenants who are probably the best tenants in the marketplace, those who have an Airbnb account, a credit card tied to it, and some rental history on there, those are the great tenants that you want in your properties. You're going to have to be on the platform, which means you got to play by their rules. And if you play that out a little bit, you realize that they hold all the cards in that situation. And you as the property manager are now relegated to, if you've ever rented an Airbnb or if you've ever been a host of an Airbnb, you know what's involved. You're dealing with turnover and you're dealing with maintenance and you're dealing with cleaning, but you don't have anything to do with the money or the lease agreement or the security deposit or any of this other stuff. So this kind of gets to what I was saying earlier about this is all going to be commoditized. I think property managers need to keep a close eye on Airbnb for this reason, and Zillow for a lot of similar reasons. So this is kind of my bet, my thinking is that Airbnb is going to move into traditional long-term annual leases.
And I would imagine, this is the kind of thing where just being aware of the possibility and the opportunity makes a property manager stop and say, well, wait a minute, how am I focused on, protecting the value of my company? And we've seen this where people, hey, they aggregate all of the demand, right? And that when they hold that direct account control, what a powerful position it can put them in to really move a market. And we've also seen for I don't know how many years, real estate agents say, real estate agents are gone tomorrow, Zillow's taking over tomorrow. And I think Zillow has, I don't know what percentage of market share it is, right? But it's some minority still, right, of the market share. And so while it's not an overnight thing, that's one of the things where we say, man, if a property manager is doing great business development, and if they're really doing great marketing in their local market, much like a great real estate agent, would. If a real estate agent was surviving on Zillow leads and Zillow leads alone, right, they're probably going to be in trouble.
You're at the mercy. Yeah.
You're in trouble if that's where all your business development is. And for a property manager, the same could be true. Could be true for them. How important it is to really become known for a niche that you own, of really being known as the professional resource in your market, right? Yeah. To go to for this, and a go-to resource for folks is gonna help in those situations. But it's definitely interesting to play out, and there might even be some advantages. It gets property managers thinking about too, of like, man, I would love to see a 5-star rating on a resident. The other side of the marketplace.
Oh, and that's exactly how it is on Airbnb. Every time someone books your room, you can look at their ratings, and yeah,
that's right. So it's there could be value for both sides, but as those kind of things look attractive, you've also got to think about, hey, is this company really partnering with me long term, or are they trying to aggregate all of the demand and maybe eventually put me out of business?
And I think there's no question about that. I mean, I don't think Airbnb is ever going to want to be doing the maintenance and the cleanings. And people get this idea that I'm saying Airbnb is going to be the world's biggest property manager. I don't think they're ever going to do that. Why would they enter that low margin, sweaty type business? they're going to stay right where they're at, doing the payments and maintaining the relationship. There's that saying about like the closer you get to the consumer, the more value. It's like the higher up the value chain you're moving. And why would Airbnb move down the value chain and be the guy going in and employing the cleaners and stuff? So the other people always ask me like, well, what are you doing? What's your plan? My plan is honestly, as soon as Airbnb rolls out with this and they, as soon as they have any type of like a preferred partner program, I'm going to be first in line. I'm just going to sign up and I'm going to take advantage of that rolling snowball and hopefully, milk it for a few years and be like a preferred partner or whatever it is. And the other thing I'm doing is I'm frankly buying Airbnb stock and Zillow as well as a hedge against my property management business. So maybe a little dark humor there.
No, that's funny. And what's interesting is you think about like there really could be an advantage for early adopters in the professional industry. I mean, you think about, hey, the ratings, if I'm an Uber driver, I mean, I've got a dozen customers a day. If I'm a short-term rental, right, I'm going to have dozens, maybe even per month, but certainly per quarter, my property. And so the value of those kind of ratings when you're signing a one-year lease, well, if I'm a self-managing landlord and I have a quadplex, right, I'm not gonna be able to generate the kind of credibility and reputational volume on there as, say, somebody like Peter with 500 and growing properties. In what they could do there very quickly. And, that's going to influence people's choices. I know when I look at Airbnb and I see one rating and it's a 3-star, right? Who knows why that happened, what happened, et cetera. But I just see so many other options available that have dozens of reviews, hundreds of reviews, and they're super hosts and everything else. Man, that actually could be of great service to what we want to happen in the industry, which is we want the professional to be distinguished, the professional experience 100%. From the self-managing. So it's interesting to think about how it actually could enable that.
Yep, totally agree.
Well, Peter, I know we're out of time, man. Thanks so much for being generous with your time. If you like what you heard here, definitely check out peterlohmann.com and the resources Peter has available. We scratched the surface of some of the cool things Peter has to say, but thanks for spending some time with us today, Peter. And
thanks, Andrew. Yeah, this was great.
Looking forward to the next one, man. Catch you later.
That's all for this episode of The Triple Win. Thanks go out to Carol Housel and Jeff Tucker for everything they do to put these episodes together. And we want to remind everyone that you can find more resources, upcoming events, a link to our private Facebook group where the conversation continues in between these episodes with other professional property managers. All of that you can find at rbp.secondnature.com. Again, that's rbp.secondnature.com. And until next time, keep transforming what it means to be in professional property management by finding and applying your next triple win. We want it to be true that every time we see you, we see a better version of you and your business. With that, cheers.